Hi, this is a video about maintenance on your NuTone Intercom system. It's going to cover specifically systems that were made between 1984 and around the end of 2010. Not earlier than that and not later than that. One of the most common emails and phone calls I get from people are about how the push button switches, these, let's unwrap this here. These push button switches, this is a NuTone IS305. This is for a 3003 system. This particular remote station was made in 1985, so it's pretty old. This is out of the service van. This is a setup you take to people's houses to test their master stations and things like that. So it's a pretty old speaker. It's been used a zillion times on service calls and so forth. But what happens, what people call about, is when you push the buttons, it makes this horrible scratchy sound on your intercom system because the switches that are behind the buttons are dirty and scratched and damaged inside. The scratchy noise that they make is the sound of the electricity scraping across the rough contacts inside the switches. It's very much like rubbing sandpaper against itself. Why does this happen and what do you do about it? Well, it happens because, and I'm going to get one out here to show you. Let's see if we can find a prime example. This one's pretty good. So this is the switchboard out of a station exactly like this. 3 push buttons and a volume control. And if I hold it up here and if you look really carefully, you can see all the dirt and grunge that's built up on the switches here. In fact, this one, it's not loose, it's just worn. So what happens over time is the inside or the back side of the station, this side, this is inside the wall cavity behind the sheetrock. And over decades, dirt and dust and insulation and crud filters down through the wall cavities and it builds up on the switches. Eventually, especially the super fine particles like that gray cellulose insulation that they used to use back in the 80s and 90s, it finds its way inside the switch, inside the body of the switch right here. And inside the switch are little brass contacts, and these are push button switches, so you push them in and out like this. They have little springs that make them pop back out. And when there's dirt and crud inside of it, and these are the contacts, every time you push it, the contacts go like this. And if there's dirt and dust and crud on the surface of the contacts, every time you push it, it makes little microscopic scratches in the brass surface to an electron, which is super small. Those scratches might as well be as big as the Grand Canyon. You end up with a rough surface. So as you push it, you're pushing one rough surface over another rough surface, much like pushing sandpaper against itself. And the scratchy sound comes from the sound of the electricity scraping across the rough surface. So what's the normal course? What do we do? How do you solve that? Well, what you do is you clean them. And we have a playlist on our YouTube channel. It's entitled NuTone Remote Speakers Cleaning Controls. There's 15 different videos and I cover many different models of remote stations and I show how to do it. And primarily what you do is you get some of this, the Deoxit D5, and you very carefully remove the knobs and spray it into the body of the switch and work it back and forth, and that flushes away the crud that's in there and will improve it. It improves the contact surface of the brass and so on, but it doesn't solve the damage to the contact surfaces, the microscopic scratches that the dirt and crud has created. One of the things I recommend in some of the videos is if they're super bad and this doesn't solve it completely, you can also do a second round of the Deoxit F5, which has more lubricant in it and lasts longer, and that will help improve it some also. So you can go to a house. We used to do a lot of service calls at people's houses that the service call would be classified as what we called a clean clean and adjust. And you would go around and clean all the switches and adjust all the settings, and then the system would work much better than it did before the lady called you. There are limits to this. This will not solve all problems. What this video is about is a better solution that's come up recently, that for the hardcore intercom owners, they want their system to be more like, wait, brand new. There's something you can do. You might be wondering, what are all these plastic tubs here for? Well, let's move this stuff out of the way and I'm going to show you. These are tubs and tubs and tubs of switchboards. These are switchboards for 4006 and mostly 4006, a few maybe 4406 systems. They use basically the same switchboard. These are switchboards for ribbon cable 4006s. And these are switchboards for 3-wire systems, which would be 3003s and 3303s. Because those models, 4006, 4406, 3003, 3303, they all use the same remote switchboard design, so they're all interchangeable. One of the things that I find amusing when people contact me, and sometimes annoying, is there's this mindset that you have a 30 or 35-year-old intercom system and you need a part for it, and for whatever reason people think, oh, they're just available, you can get them anywhere. And that's not the case. So just to be clear about it, as of today, which is October 26, 2021, NuTone has exactly 0 intercom parts available. All intercom products, all intercom parts, gone, history, never will make any more. That's it, all done. Things like switchboards, which are wear and tear parts, are not available, haven't been available for a long time. Here's actually a switchboard. This is out of an IS445, would have been made between 1996 and around 2005 or so. This is actually a NuTone, genuine NuTone replacement part number 4363800. It's in its original bag, never been used. It's in good condition, like brand new, one of only a very few that we have left. Almost all these other ones, here's another one. Got a few of those in here. But this tub and this tub over here, these are all used boards. These all came out of speakers that we've scrapped down. We saved the boards and other usable parts and throw the discolored plastic grills away because nobody wants those. But we don't waste things around here. We save things because someday they could be valuable, and that day may be today. So you might be wondering, so what's changed? Why is today a good day to have tubs and tubs and tubs of used switchboards? Well, because today we have a solution perhaps for some people that will solve the problem of excessively worn and excessively noisy switches that cleaning may help, but may not solve the problem, may not be good enough for some people who want it to be much better than it is. So what has changed? Well, what's changed is we have found, or I shouldn't say we have found, a customer of mine, a fellow named John from Florida, who used to be a parts resource manager for, wait for it, IBM. He's retired now, this was a long time ago, but he is very diligent about finding parts for things he wants to fix. That's what he did for 30 years at IBM. He has found replacement push button switches that match the original ones. I have to give John a lot of credit. Many, many, many people over the decades have told me, I'm going to find replacement switches and better quality switches and we're going to rebuild it all, and all have failed. Okay, it's not an easy thing to do. People don't realize that if you start going down the rabbit hole of a parts search for a push button switch, there are literally hundreds of thousands of them. There are no individual part numbers for these, not from NuTone, not from anybody that I've ever found. There are no identifying marks on it. No one has ever been able to tell me what company made these switches. They made them by the millions based on the number of speakers that NuTone made, and also I'm sure they were used in other products. So it's got to be fairly common, but never could find a direct replacement. And a direct replacement has to be just that. It has to be an actual direct replacement. It has to be the same form factor, it has to be the same size, the spacing on the leads on the back have to match the holes in the circuit board, the size of the stem, the length of the stem, it all has to be the same. Because if it isn't, it's not going to fit, and then it's not going to work right. So John was working on his 3003 system, and he had noisy switches, and he cleaned them, but he wasn't satisfied with that, and I was assisting him. He did all of the repairs on his own equipment. We weren't really involved with that, other than giving advice and perhaps a little encouragement about things he didn't know about. But other than that, it was all on him, and he decided that he was going to find replacement switches. And it turned out that after an extensive search for parts, he found them. And these are direct and equal replacements for the original switches on the original switchboards. And he actually ordered a bunch of these and sat down and replaced all the switches on all his switchboards, and he verified to me that they all work correctly and it solved the problem with noisy switches. So good on John for sharing and spending the time to source these and then share it with me so that people have an alternative. And since John shared with me, I'm going to share with all of you. And in the video description down below, where it says video description, the part that no one ever reads, there'll be a part number for these, which you can order from Mauser, which is where we buy them from, and you can order them and sit down and replace them yourself if you're inclined to do that. Now, I'm going to do something in this video that I don't normally do. I'm going to show you actually how to fix something. The actual replacement of the switches. Most people don't solder. Most people don't have the proper equipment. Most people don't have any experience, and they don't know what to do. But sometimes they want to try. And this is an ideal beginner project. This is not complicated. It's the most fundamental, rudimentary task that involves soldering that I could imagine. You know, you certainly don't want to you don't want to jump in on your first effort trying to fix the master control board on the 4006 if you don't know anything about electronics and never worked on a circuit board and don't know how to do any of these things. That's not the place you want to start. It's like you're not going to rebuild your 7-speed automatic paddle shift transmission out of a Corvette on your first time trying to work on a car. Maybe you should try something a little simpler, like putting air in the tires. So, you know, don't jump to the deep end to start with. Start with something that's simple. These are the push buttons, the caps that go on the switches, and I'm going to show you why we have those out in a bit and put those off to the side. Let's look at what's on the switchboard. It's very simple. It's a small rectangular fiberglass circuit board. You've got 3 push button switches. You've got a volume control pot like this. You've got 2 little capacitors. There are 3 little resistors. And down here, this little black guy with the stripe on it, that's a diode. Okay, the diode and the resistors never go bad, don't wear out, never a problem, don't worry about it. The capacitors, I would replace them if I was doing this job at my shop, because these are inexpensive little parts. Their values I already stock, and it's like an extra like a minute and a half to swap them out. So if you're going to do it, let's do it right. The volume control pot, these are wire wound resistor potentiometers. They do periodically need to be cleaned. They do get dirty inside, and the wire that's wrapped around it, the part that when you turn the shaft, the wiper moves on, they do oxidize. They get a coating on them, but if you use the little deoxit D5 and you rotate them back and forth, it'll clean itself up and it'll be fine. This is not a replaceable part at the moment, and also it doesn't generally need to be. A little cleaning on the volume pots would be fine. It's the push button switches that we're going to focus on today, and the first job is to choose 3 of our replacements. Those are the 3 we're going to put in. You can't see that. There's our 3. And the rest of them we're going to put off to the side and save. And then what we need to do is we need to remove these. Now each one of these is exactly the same. It's the same exact switch. It has the same exact 6 little contacts on the back that solder onto the board, and we need to remove these. When I remove parts like this, we'll turn on the Heiko. I use a vacuum desoldering tool, which is a professional tool because I sit here sometimes for 5 and 6 hours at a time repairing circuit boards, and so it makes my life easier. You may not have one of those, so I'm going to do 2 of the switches that way, and then I'm going to show you a way that the at-home do-it-yourselfer would most likely. All right, the desoldering station has warmed up, and what we need to do is we need to desolder the solder points on the back of the board, 6 per switch. So we're going to be working on the board upside down, and since these tend to flop around and that's not a good way to work on something, we're going to use one of our little metal cups, my favorite thing, and we're going to sit it in the cup like this to hold it in place, because that makes it more stable and that makes it easier. We're going to put our magnifiers on so I can actually see what we're doing, and I'll try to show you the best I can about the desoldering tool, which is this, and show you the way we would do it. And I'm going to try to do this and keep my big hands out of the way. And there's the first one. And if we go on this side, you can wiggle, 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 and the switch comes out. Where does that go? That goes in the trash cup because we don't need it. Now I'm going to take this one out on the end, and I'm going to leave this one for a minute. We're not going to take all 3 off in the beginning because I'm going to show you, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to do the end one next. So we'll take the end one off, and that goes in the cup. Now, good practice is, since the board's kind of dirty, you can take a little alcohol pad here, and we're just going to wipe off some of the grunge. I personally don't like working on dirty circuit boards. I oftentimes clean them when I fix people's intercoms. You would be surprised at what the circuit boards look like inside. And yes, they get very dirty. So we'll clean off the grunge, and then we're going to take our switches. These are our new ones, and we're going to insert them into the holes in the circuit board. Like this. And you have to make sure that they sit the bottom of the switch, this part right here, is sitting flat on the board. It can't be tipped or tilted because then the stem won't come through the opening in the grill correctly, and then the button won't fit and it'll hang up. So you have to have them flat. So I'm going to go ahead and put the second one in also. Make sure it's flat. And then I'm going to put it back in our cup, and I'm going to resolder them. Now, if you solder, you don't need anything fancy to do this. This is not highly critical NASA work for the Mars rover that's flying zillions of miles across the solar system to go to land on Mars. It's just a switch on an intercom board. If you get it wrong, you can always desolder it and fix it because it's not complicated. So you just need a basic soldering iron and a little bit of rosin core solder. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly solder the switch onto the board, making sure that you don't get any bridges across the connections on the back of the board. 6 solder spots, 6 blobs of solder. Each blob of solder is not touching another blob, it's individual by itself. So there's one, and you can see how long that took. And don't be cheap with the solder. Put enough. So you get this nice little mound of solder on there with the point of the contact out of the back of the switch sticking out of the middle of it, because that's what it's supposed to be. And your solder joints should look like that. See how this one and this one are nice and shiny, and the one in the middle that's original is kind of dull. Well, it's dull because this was wave soldered in a machine, and the hand soldered ones always look better. Do a proper job because it's not that complicated. All right, so we've replaced the two outer switches, and this is the original one. So why did I leave that one? Well, the reason I left that one is to show you that when we put the chrome button caps on, we'll put it on the original one first and it snaps on, and then we'll put these two and they snap on nicely like that. When you look across the top here, they're all reasonably the same level. Yeah, they wiggle, the caps wiggle a little bit because that's the way the switches are. But they're not, the two new ones are not sticking up higher or they're not lower than the original one. They're all the same. So you know that the chrome buttons, when you put this back in the speaker grill, they're going to stick out the right amount and it's going to look the way it's supposed to, because a successful repair is all about the details. So we'll go ahead and take these off. One of the things I notice about these that I like is pulling off caps off the original switches sometimes can be really hard, but the new ones, they come off nice and easy, which is good. Now we have to replace the center switch because that's an old one still, and now I'm going to show you how you can do it yourself with an at-home setup that you don't have to have a $1,600 desoldering station. So let's turn our desoldering station off because it makes a lot of noise. We're going to remove the center switch right here. That's the last original switch. So what are we going to do it with? How do you do this if you're a weekend warrior soldering? You're going to use this. This is desoldering braid. It's a copper braid, and it has flux in it that when you heat this up, it will suck the solder up off the solder joint on the back of the board. Now, there are also handheld vacuum little pump desoldering tool things that you can buy for like $9 online. That would work also. I can't show you that because I don't own one of those. They don't work for me. It's too many things to hold on to and it's difficult to do, in my opinion. This is better. You can buy a little roll of this on Amazon. It'll cost you like maybe like $4 or something like that. And this has 5 feet of desoldering braid in it, which is a lifetime supply for most people. Now, the way you do this is, the first thing we're going to do is to make the solder flow into the braid better. First thing we're going to do is we're going to touch up each of the original joints and add a little bit of fresh solder because that will make it flow better. So this is the one we're working on right here. And all you have to do is put your soldering iron on each joint for a second and melt a little bit of new solder on the old solder. Like that. That's one of those tricks that you learn when you do this all the time, because the new solder mixes with the old solder. The new solder has more flux in it probably, and it will make it flow better. So the way you use the soldering braid is you put the braid over the joint like this, and you put the soldering iron on top of the braid, and it gets hot and it sucks it up. And it took exactly that long to do the first one. So this is not a complicated process. You have to keep moving down the braid because as it sucks up the solder, the braid fills up with solder and then it can't suck up anymore. And when you get to the point that it becomes too unwieldy, what you do is you snip off the end of the braid that has it full of solder, and you roll out a little more, and you do the next ones. And when you do this, this is one of those chances to sit there quietly, or alternately, you have your favorite AC/DC album playing in the background, sometimes very loud. And you get all like Zen-like when you do it. All right, so that's that one. And now we can remove the switch. Like that. So if I wasn't talking, it would have taken me 1/3 the time that it did in the video to take that out. So as you can see, not a complicated thing to do. We'll clean the board off underneath where the switch was, get rid of the crud. And now it's time to put our third switch on. So again, we'll insert the switch, make sure it sits flat on the board. And we'll put it back upside down on our little cup. And we'll solder it in place. Just like that. Now we have one more thing that we're going to do. And I'm going to turn my desoldering station back on because, well, I'm not admitting that I like to be lazy. I do. I don't feel like fighting the desoldering brace. It's not my normal way. I have this for a variety of reasons because sometimes it comes in handy, but it's not something I use every day. I prefer my desoldering station. The other thing we're going to do on this is we're going to replace the little yellow capacitors here and here because this board was probably made sometime, let's see if we have a date code, 19th week of 1986. These kind of parts, if you buy them enough to do your system, you probably need maybe 2 dozen of them if you have like 12 stations or something, less if you have less. You're going to pay, for a small quantity, you're probably going to pay like maybe 25 cents a piece for them, so not super expensive. These are 47 microfarad at 16 volt, a very common value. And let me look in my parts bin here. And there's a sack of replacement capacitors. Same value, same voltage rating. We need 2 of them. They are smaller than the original ones. The physical size is smaller. Why? Because everything is smaller nowadays. How do you think you get an iPhone in your back pocket? You know, iPhone has a microprocessor in it that is probably 10,000 times more powerful than the one that went to the moon in 1969, and the one that went to the moon is the size of an encyclopedia. So everything's smaller, so don't worry about it. The other thing you have to watch out for is you have to, when you put in the new ones, you have to do it in the right orientation, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So first thing we're going to do is remove the 2 old ones. Those go in the cup with the old parts, and we're going to clean the circuit board a little bit like that. Now, capacitors have plus and minus like batteries, and if you look right here, here's where one capacitor sat and here's where the other one sat, and you notice that here it's got a plus sign, and over here it's got a plus sign for the second one. The leads on the capacitor are different lengths. One is long, one is short. The long one is plus. And also on the outside of the covering, it's got a stripe with a minus sign. That's the minus side. So when you put these in, you have to put the long side, the plus side, in the hole that says plus. If you put them in backwards, they will not do the job they are supposed to do. They will not blow up. They will not ruin your system. It just won't work correctly. All right, so I put them both on the board. Put that back in the cup, and we'll solder these in place. Like that. And you take your little side cutters and you snip off the extra leads because you don't want things getting bent around and touching some other point and shorting something out or something like that. So now we have a cleaned and rebuilt switchboard for an IS305. The last thing that we should do while we have it out, because now is an easy time to do it, is we're going to take our deoxid D5 and we're going to clean the volume control pot. Now I've shown this in other videos, but I'll show it in this one also. If you look at the front of the pot right here, there's a little hole. And that's where you spray the cleaner in because that gets it inside and that's what you want. Do not take this off the board. Do not pry it apart because you'll never get it back together. These are not designed to be taken apart. I don't care what anybody says. I know people, oh no, you can unbend the tabs and take it apart and clean it all real thoroughly and put it back together. No, don't. It's not worth it. You're going to break it, and then where are you going to find a replacement? It took years for somebody to find a replacement for these. Now we got to look for this? I think not. So all you got to do is take your deoxy D5, spray a little bit into the hole, and see how little I sprayed? Not half the can, not a minute's worth of spray. It was like 1 second's worth of spray, and I wasn't even pushing the nozzle all the way down. And then all you do is you take the shaft and you twist it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then what I usually do is set it at the other extreme of its travel and spray a little more, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's all you really need to do. Not complicated. And you might as well do it now because you've got it out, and that makes it super easy. We'll wipe off any excess. And there's our rebuilt board. That's going to be the end of this video about this project, because there will be more. The next time I have a 3003 on the workbench to repair, I'm going to set it up with the actual remote station that I use when I test people's 3003s after I'm done with them, and show you what dirty, scratchy sounding switches. And yes, are the switches on my shop test speakers, are they dirty and scratchy? Yes. Why? Because they're old and the buttons have been pushed, I don't know, 1 million times, and they get worn out. I'm not concerned about the scratchiness when I test someone's system. What I care about is, does the system function correctly? And the scratchiness won't make it not work correctly. It's just annoying. What I'm going to do is, the next time I work on a 3003, which will probably be in the next week or so, I'm going to take my shop speaker, I'm going to disassemble it, I'm going to replace the switches, and then put it all back together, and I'll do a video showing what it sounds like before I replace it, and a video that shows what it sounds like after I replace it, because why not? It's a good thing to do. This is a do-it-yourself thing that you can do at home. If you've got 5 or 6 or 8 speakers, which is about that most people have in their house, you can order the little switches, and you could do, even if you just did one at a time and you did it over the course of a few weeks, it's not a lot of time, and your system will work much better than it ever has before. Thanks to John, we now have an alternative. I hope you found this interesting, and perhaps for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications, and every time we post a new video, you get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.